The conference room felt like a battlefield, and Tessa Anderson could sense the tension before she even opened the door. She pushed through anyway, her portfolio tucked under one arm and her tablet in the other hand, ready to present her vision for what would be the biggest corporate event of the year. The annual gala for Westmont Industries was legendary in the business world, a night where deals worth millions were struck over champagne and carefully curated conversation. Landing this job would cement her reputation as one of the top event planners in the city. What she hadn't expected was the CEO himself to be sitting at the head of the table, his dark eyes fixed on her the moment she walked in. Xavier Westmont was younger than she'd imagined, maybe 35 at most, with sharp features that looked like they'd been carved from stone and a jawline that could cut glass. His black suit was tailored to perfection, and everything about him screamed power and control. The two men flanking him looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. "Miss Anderson," Xavier said, his voice deep and measured, "you're 3 minutes late." Tessa glanced at her watch. It was 2:03. Their meeting had been scheduled for 2 o'clock. "Traffic on Fifth Avenue," she said, setting her portfolio on the table. "I apologize. Shall we begin? Punctuality matters in business," Xavier continued, leaning back in his chair. "If you can't arrive on time for a meeting, how can I trust you'll execute an event flawlessly?" Heat crept up Tessa's neck. She'd been planning events for 8 years, had managed everything from intimate weddings to corporate conferences for 500 people, and she'd never once had a client question her professionalism within the first 30 seconds of meeting her. "With respect, Mr. Westmont, I've reviewed my contract, and nowhere does it state that 3 minutes of traffic delay would disqualify me from doing my job," she said, her voice steady despite the irritation bubbling inside her. "I'm here now, and I have some incredible ideas for your gala that I think you'll want to hear." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or interest. She couldn't tell. "Fine," he said. "Show me what you've got." Tessa pulled up her presentation on the conference room screen, walking them through her vision for the gala. She'd spent weeks on this proposal, researching Westmont Industries' history, their values, their aesthetic. She designed an event that would be elegant without being stuffy, impressive without being ostentatious. The color scheme was midnight blue and silver, with touches of gold. The venue she'd selected was a historic building downtown with soaring ceilings and massive windows overlooking the city. Xavier interrupted her before she'd even finished the first slide. "The Drake Building," he said flatly. "You're proposing we hold our gala at the Drake Building?" "Yes," Tessa said. "It's perfect. The architecture is stunning, the location is central, and we held our gala there 3 years ago," Xavier cut in. "I want something new, something that makes a statement." Tessa bit back her frustration. The Drake Building was completely renovated last year. It's essentially a new venue. "But if you prefer something else, I have backup options." She clicked to the next slide, showing the Riverside Museum, a modern glass structure on the waterfront. "Too cold," Xavier said immediately. "Too sterile." Next slide. The Botanical Gardens Conservatory, with its lush greenery and romantic lighting. "Too casual," Xavier said. "This is a corporate event, not a garden party." Tessa took a slow breath through her nose. She'd presented 5 different venue options in her proposal, and Xavier had rejected all of them within minutes. The 2 men sitting beside him looked increasingly uncomfortable, one of them clearing his throat. "Mr. Westmont, perhaps we should let Miss Anderson finish her presentation," the older man suggested gently. "I hired her to plan an event that meets our standards, Richard," Xavier said, his gaze never leaving Tessa. "If she can't handle feedback, she's not the right person for this job." "Feedback is welcome," Tessa said, her voice tight, Blanket rejection without consideration is not feedback. The room went silent. Richard's eyes widened. The other man looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Xavier stood up, and Tessa realized just how tall he was, easily over 6 feet. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy. "You have confidence," he said quietly. "I'll give you that. But confidence without results is just arrogance. I've built a company worth $3 billion by paying attention to details and demanding excellence. If you want this job, you're going to have to prove you can deliver what I need, not what you think I should want." Tessa met his gaze, refusing to look away even though her heart was pounding. "Then tell me what you need, Mr. Westmont, because so far all I'm hearing is what you don't want." For a long moment they just stared at each other. Then, to her surprise, Xavier's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "I need a venue that reflects innovation and tradition," he said. "I need an event that will impress investors without alienating our long-term partners. I need every detail, from the napkins to the lighting to the timing of each course, to be perfect." "Can you do that?" "Yes," Tessa said without hesitation. "But I'm going to need your input, and I'm going to need you to trust my expertise when it comes to execution." Xavier studied her for another moment, then nodded. "We'll meet twice a week to review progress. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock. Don't be late." He walked out of the conference room without another word, leaving Tessa alone with Richard and the other man, who introduced himself as James, the CFO. "Don't take it personally," Richard said, giving her an apologetic smile. "Xavier is intense, but he's fair. If you do good work, he'll recognize it. He's also impossible to please," James added. "Just warning you now." Tessa gathered her materials, her mind already racing. She'd dealt with difficult clients before, but something about Xavier Westmont got under her skin in a way she couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was his arrogance. Maybe it was the way he dismissed her ideas without really listening. Or maybe it was the fact that, despite everything, she found him incredibly attractive, and that annoyed her more than anything else. The next Tuesday, Tessa arrived at the Westmont Industries building 15 minutes early. She'd learned her lesson. Xavier was already in the conference room when she walked in, reviewing something on his laptop. "Miss Anderson," he said, glancing up. "You're early." "I'm punctual," she corrected, setting down her new presentation materials. "There's a difference." That almost smile flickered across his face again before disappearing. "Let's see what you've come up with." Tessa had spent every waking moment of the past 5 days researching and planning. She'd visited 7 different venues, talked to caterers, florists, lighting designers. She'd revised her entire concept based on Xavier's vague instructions about innovation and tradition. "The Montgomery estate," she said, pulling up photos of a stunning mansion on the outskirts of the city. "It was built in 1920 by the Montgomery family, one of the founding families of this city. Last year, it was purchased and renovated by a tech entrepreneur who modernized the interior while preserving the historical exterior. It's perfect tradition meets innovation." Xavier leaned forward, studying the images. Tessa held her breath. "The ballroom," he said. "It's too small." "It holds 250 people comfortably," Tessa replied. "Your usual guest list is 200. What if we want to expand the guest list? Then we use the adjoining salon, which opens up with retractable walls to create one large space that holds 350. Xavier nodded slowly. "The kitchen facilities, state-of-the-art. I've already spoken with 3 different catering companies who are familiar with the space. Parking, valet service with shuttles from a nearby lot. I've mapped out the logistics." For the next hour, Xavier grilled her on every possible detail. What about sound systems? What about backup power in case of an outage? What about accessibility for guests with mobility issues? Tessa had an answer for everything, her preparation paying off. When they finally finished, Xavier sat back in his chair. "This could work," he said. Coming from him, Tessa realized that was high praise. "I'll send you a revised proposal with all the details we discussed," she said, "including a timeline and budget breakdown." "I want to see the venue in person," Xavier said. "Thursday afternoon we'll go together." Tessa blinked. "You want to visit the venue personally?" "I don't sign off on anything I haven't seen myself," Xavier said. "Is that a problem?" "No," Tessa said quickly. "Not at all. I'll arrange a tour." As she left the building, Tessa couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something more complicated than a simple venue tour. Spending an afternoon alone with Xavier Westmont, outside the formal setting of his office, felt dangerous somehow. She told herself she was being ridiculous. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Thursday afternoon was unseasonably warm for October, the sky a brilliant blue as Tessa waited outside the Montgomery estate. She'd chosen to dress professionally but comfortably, trading her usual heels for elegant flats, knowing they'd be walking through the property. Xavier pulled up in a sleek black car, driving himself rather than using a chauffeur. He emerged wearing dark jeans and a fitted button-down shirt, no tie, and Tessa had to remind herself to breathe. He looked different outside his office, somehow more human. "Ready?" he asked. "The estate manager is meeting us inside," Tessa said, leading the way up the stone steps. The tour took 2 hours. Xavier examined everything, asking questions about electrical capacity, fire safety systems, climate control. But Tessa noticed other things too. The way his hand brushed along the carved banister of the main staircase, appreciating the craftsmanship. The way he paused in the ballroom, looking up at the restored chandelier with something like wonder in his eyes. "This is beautiful," he said quietly, and for the first time there was no criticism in his voice. "It is," Tessa agreed, standing beside him. "This is why I chose it. Yes, it's functional and it meets all your requirements, but it's also special. Your guests will remember this." Xavier turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "You have good instincts," he said. "Thank you," Tessa replied, surprised by how much his approval meant to her. They finished the tour and said goodbye to the estate manager. As they walked back to their cars, Xavier said, "Have you eaten? It's past 7. Tessa checked her phone, startled to realize how late it had gotten. "No, I haven't. There's a restaurant a few miles from here," Xavier said. "Nothing fancy, if you're interested." This was crossing a line Tessa knew. Dinner with a client alone felt personal, but she was hungry, and despite their rocky start, she found herself wanting to say yes. "Sure," she said. "I'll follow you." The restaurant was a small Italian place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles. It was the last place Tessa would have expected someone like Xavier Westmont to choose, and he seemed to read her thoughts. "My grandfather used to bring me here when I was a kid," he explained as they sat down, "before Westmont Industries became what it is now, back when we were just a small manufacturing company trying to survive." "Your grandfather founded the company?" Tessa asked. Xavier nodded. "In 1952. He started with 15 employees in a warehouse. By the time he retired, we had 500 employees and contracts across the country. When I took over 8 years ago, I promised him I'd take it further." $3 billion, Tessa said. "I'd say you kept your promise." "He died 2 years ago," Xavier said. "Never got to see us break the $1 billion mark. That's one of my biggest regrets." There was genuine emotion in his voice, and Tessa felt her perception of him shifting. He wasn't just the demanding, impossible CEO she'd met in that conference room. He was someone who'd loved his grandfather, who carried the weight of legacy on his shoulders. "The gala," she said slowly. "It's important to you because of him." "Everything I do is because of him," Xavier said. "He taught me that details matter, that excellence isn't optional, that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing right." "Is that why you're so hard on people?" Tessa asked. "So hard on me." Xavier was quiet for a moment. "I'm hard on people because I'm hard on myself," he finally said. "I don't accept mediocrity from anyone, including me. Maybe especially me." Their food arrived and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Tessa found herself laughing at Xavier's story about a disastrous company retreat in his first year as CEO, when everything that could go wrong did go wrong. "The caterer quit the morning of the event," Xavier said. "The keynote speaker missed his flight, and then, as if the universe was mocking me, it started raining and we'd planned everything outdoors." "What did you do?" Tessa asked. "Ordered 50 pizzas, gave the keynote speech myself, and moved everything into the hotel lobby," Xavier said. "It was chaos, but everyone still talks about it as the best retreat we ever had." "Sometimes the imperfect moments are the most memorable," Tessa said. "Don't tell me you're going to order 50 pizzas for the gala," Xavier said, and there was that almost smile again. "I'm going to plan the gala so perfectly that there won't be any need for emergency pizzas," Tessa countered. "But I'll have a backup plan just in case." "Good," Xavier said, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm starting to think I hired the right person for this job." The drive home felt too short. Tessa's mind was spinning as she replayed the evening, the way Xavier had opened up, the moments when she'd caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. She was in trouble, she realized. Because somewhere between the conference room confrontation and dinner at an Italian restaurant, she'd started to like Xavier Westmont. And that was a complication she absolutely did not need. The following weeks fell into a pattern. Tuesday and Thursday meetings, sometimes at the office, sometimes at vendors' locations as they selected everything from table linens to menu options. And with each meeting, Tessa discovered new layers to Xavier. He was demanding, yes. But he was also brilliant, catching details she'd missed, asking questions that made her think more carefully about her choices. He had strong opinions about everything, from the font on the invitations to the type of chairs they'd use. "These chairs are uncomfortable," Xavier said at one meeting with the rental company, sitting in the elegant gilt chair Tessa had selected. "Our guests will be sitting through a 4-hour event. Comfort matters." "They're the most popular chairs for formal events," Tessa argued. "They're classic and elegant. They're torture devices disguised as furniture," Xavier replied. "Find something that looks good and doesn't feel like sitting on a wooden plank." Tessa wanted to argue, but when she actually sat in the chair for more than a few minutes, she had to admit he had a point. They ended up selecting a different style, slightly more padded but still elegant enough for the formal setting. It was like that with everything. Xavier challenged her constantly, pushing back on her decisions, forcing her to justify every choice. It was exhausting and infuriating and, somehow, exhilarating. She'd never worked with a client who cared so much about every detail, who was so invested in the outcome. But there were other moments, too. The way Xavier's hand would brush hers when they were looking at fabric samples together. The way his voice would soften when he thanked her for accommodating yet another change. The way he'd started arriving at their meetings with coffee for both of them, remembering that she took hers with cream and 2 sugars. "You're spending a lot of time at Westmont Industries," Tessa's best friend Lily commented one evening when they met for drinks. "How's the impossible CEO treating you?" "He's not impossible," Tessa said, then caught Lily's raised eyebrow. Okay, he's a little impossible, but he's also brilliant and dedicated, and he actually cares about making this event perfect. And he's attractive, Lily added knowingly. You've mentioned that at least 3 times. I have not, Tessa protested. Direct quote from last week. He was wearing this gray suit that fit him perfectly, Lily recited. And the week before, he has these incredible dark eyes that see everything. Tessa, you're falling for your client. I'm not, Tessa insisted, but even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. It's just, he's interesting, and we work well together once you get past the arguing. Arguing can be foreplay, Lily said with a grin. It's not like that, Tessa said firmly. He's my client, that's all. But that night, alone in her apartment, Tessa couldn't stop thinking about Xavier. About the way he'd smiled at her that afternoon when she'd surprised him with a menu option he hadn't expected. About the way he'd held the door for her as they left the tasting, his hand briefly touching the small of her back. She was lying to herself, she realized. She was absolutely falling for Xavier Westmont, and she had no idea what to do about it. The situation came to a head 6 weeks before the gala. Tessa had arranged a meeting with the florist, a talented designer named Marcus, who'd created stunning arrangements for some of the city's most prestigious events. She'd worked with him before and trusted his artistic vision. Xavier took one look at the proposed centerpieces and shook his head. Too tall, he said. Guests won't be able to see each other across the table. They're elevated on clear stands, Marcus explained patiently. The sightlines are actually quite good. I don't like them, Xavier said flatly. We need something lower, simpler. Tessa could see Marcus bristling. She'd warned him that Xavier was particular, but nothing really prepared you for experiencing it firsthand. Mr. Westmont, she said carefully, Marcus is one of the best floral designers in the city. Maybe we could look at some alternative options before dismissing this concept entirely. I'm not dismissing anything, Xavier said, his voice tight. I'm stating a preference. This is my company's event. Or did you forget that? The room went cold. Marcus excused himself, saying he'd go pull some other samples from his van. As soon as he was gone, Tessa turned to Xavier. That was rude, she said, her voice low and angry. Marcus has been working on these designs for 2 weeks. The least you can do is give him a chance to explain his vision before shutting him down. I hired you to manage vendors, Xavier said, not to tell me how to run my event. You hired me to plan this event, Tessa corrected, her frustration finally boiling over. But you won't let me do my job. You second-guess every decision, reject every idea, and treat everyone like they're incompetent, including me. Xavier's jaw tightened. If you can't handle this, Miss Anderson, I'm sure I can find someone who can. Go ahead, Tessa said, standing up. Find someone else. Find someone who will just nod and agree with everything you say and never challenge you. I'm sure that will result in a fantastic event. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door, her heart pounding. She was throwing away the biggest job of her career, but she couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't keep working with someone who made her feel incompetent 1 minute and made her heart race the next. Tessa, wait, Xavier said, and the use of her first name stopped her in her tracks. She turned around. Xavier was standing now, running a hand through his hair, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. You're right, he said quietly. I was rude to Marcus, and to you I've been. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. I've been impossible to work with, I know that. Then why? Tessa asked. Why hire someone if you're not going to trust them? Xavier was quiet for a long moment. My grandfather's last gala, he finally said. The year before he died, we hired an event planner who assured us everything would be perfect, and it was a disaster. The food was cold, The sound system failed during the speeches. Half the decorations never showed up. My grandfather was humiliated in front of his oldest friends and business partners. I swore I'd never let that happen again. Tessa's anger faded, replaced by understanding. So you stopped trusting event planners. I stopped trusting anyone with something this important, Xavier admitted. And I know that's not fair to you. You've done incredible work. Every decision you've made has been smart and thoughtful, and I keep tearing them apart because He paused. Because I'm terrified of failing him again. The vulnerability in his voice made Tessa's chest ache. She walked back toward him, stopping a few feet away. Xavier, she said softly, I can't promise that nothing will go wrong. Events are live and unexpected things happen. But I can promise that I will plan this gala with the same care and attention that you'd give it yourself. And if something does go wrong, I'll fix it. That's what I do. Xavier met her eyes. I know, he said. I do trust you, Tessa. That's actually the problem. How is trust a problem? She asked, confused. Because I don't trust easily, Xavier said. And when I do, it means something. It means. He stopped himself, shaking his head. We should get Marcus back in here. I'll apologize and look at his alternatives. But Tessa couldn't let it go. It means what, Xavier? He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see the conflict in his eyes. It means I care, he finally said. About your opinion. About what you think of me. And that's complicated because you work for me and this is supposed to be professional, and I'm doing a terrible job of keeping it that way. Tessa's breath caught. You care what I think of you? Yes, Xavier said simply. I have from the moment you called me out in that first meeting. You weren't intimidated by me, and you didn't just agree with everything I said. You challenged me. No one challenges me, Tessa. Someone should, Tessa said, her pulse racing. You're brilliant, Xavier, but you're also stubborn and controlling, and you need someone to push back. Is that what you think of me? Xavier asked, taking a step closer. Stubborn and controlling. Yes, Tessa said. And also dedicated and passionate and smarter than anyone else I've ever worked with. You drive me crazy, Xavier, but you also make me want to do better work, be better at what I do. You make me feel challenged in a way I haven't felt in years. They were standing close now, close enough that Tessa could see the flecks of gold in Xavier's dark eyes, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. We shouldn't do this, Xavier said quietly. It's not professional. No, Tessa agreed. It's not. But neither of them moved away. The tension between them was electric, years of friction and attraction finally reaching a breaking point. The door to the consultation room opened, and they both jumped apart as Marcus walked back in with his assistant, carrying new samples. Sorry that took so long, Marcus said cheerfully, apparently oblivious to the charged atmosphere. But I think you're going to love these alternatives. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Xavier was polite and engaged, working with Marcus to select a different centerpiece design that satisfied everyone. But Tessa could barely focus, hyper-aware of Xavier's presence across the table, the way his eyes kept finding hers. After Marcus left, Xavier turned to her. Dinner, he asked. We should talk about this. This? Tessa asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. Us, Xavier said. Whatever this is between us, because I can't focus on anything else right now, and I suspect you can't either. He was right. Tessa nodded. Okay, she said. Let's talk. They went back to the Italian restaurant, the place that was becoming their spot. Over pasta and wine, they laid out the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. I've never been attracted to a client before, Tessa admitted. I have very clear professional boundaries, or I did until I met you. I don't get distracted, Xavier said. I'm focused on work always. But then you walk into a room and I can't think about anything except how I can make you smile or what I can say to make you laugh. It's driving me insane." "So what do we do?" Tessa asked. "I have a contract through the gala, 6 more weeks." "We wait," Xavier said, though the frustration in his voice was clear. "We finish the gala. You complete your contract, and then if you're still interested, I'd like to take you on a proper date." "As Xavier, not as your client." 6 weeks, Tessa said, her heart sinking. It felt like an eternity. 6 weeks, Xavier confirmed. "Can you wait that long?" Tessa thought about it, about the complications that could arise if they started something now. About her professional reputation, about the appearance of impropriety. Xavier was right. They needed to wait. "Yes," she said, "I can wait. But Xavier?" "Yeah. No more rejecting my ideas just to argue with me," she said. "If we're going to get through the next 6 weeks, we need to actually work together." Xavier smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his entire face. "Deal," he said. "Though I have to admit, I'm going to miss fighting with you. We'll find other things to fight about," Tessa promised. "Once this is over." The next 6 weeks were the longest and most intense of Tessa's life. True to his word, Xavier stopped questioning every decision. Instead, they worked together as a true team, his eye for detail complementing her creative vision. The gala came together beautifully, every element falling into place, but the awareness between them never faded. Every meeting felt charged with possibility. Every accidental touch sent electricity through Tessa's body. Every time Xavier smiled at her, she had to remind herself of the 6-week agreement, of the importance of staying professional. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gaze intense and hungry. And she knew her own feelings were just as obvious, the way her breath would catch when he walked into a room, the way she'd find excuses to stand close to him. "You two are ridiculous," Richard commented one afternoon after a meeting when Xavier had left the room. "The tension is so thick we could cut it with a knife." "I don't know what you're talking about," Tessa said. Too quickly, Richard laughed. "I've worked with Xavier for 15 years. I've never seen him like this. He's happier, more relaxed. And the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching." He shook his head. "I just hope you both survive the wait." "We're professionals," Tessa said. "We can handle it." But as the gala approached, Tessa wasn't sure that was true. Every day felt harder than the last, the pull toward Xavier growing stronger. The night before the gala, they did a final walkthrough of the Montgomery estate. Everything was ready. The tables were set with midnight blue linens and silver chargers. The floral arrangements, a compromise between Marcus's original vision and Xavier's preferences, looked stunning. The lighting was perfect, casting everything in a warm, elegant glow. "It's beautiful," Xavier said, standing in the middle of the ballroom. "Tessa, you've done an incredible job." "We did an incredible job," Tessa corrected. "This was a team effort." Xavier turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her heart stop. 24 hours, he said quietly. "By this time tomorrow the gala will be over. Your contract will be fulfilled." 24 hours, Tessa echoed, unable to look away from him. "I don't know if I can wait that long," Xavier admitted, taking a step toward her. "I've been thinking about kissing you for weeks, Tessa. Months, maybe." "Xavier," Tessa breathed, wanting nothing more than to close the distance between them. "We agreed." "I know," he said, stopping himself. "You're right. 24 hours. We can wait 24 more hours." But the look in his eyes said that waiting was torture for him too. The night of the gala arrived. Tessa spent the entire day at the estate, overseeing the setup, managing the vendors, checking every last detail. She'd barely slept the night before, her mind racing with logistics and contingency plans and the knowledge that after tonight, everything would change. She'd chosen her dress carefully for the event. As the planner, she needed to look professional but elegant, able to blend in with the guests while still being available to handle any issues. The dress was a deep burgundy, simple and sophisticated, with her hair swept up in a classic twist. The guests began arriving at 7. Tessa watched from the sidelines as Westmont Industries' biggest investors and partners filed in, their reactions to the space exactly what she'd hoped for. Awe, delight, appreciation for the details. Xavier was in his element, working the room with effortless charm. He'd given a brief speech welcoming everyone, and Tessa had felt a surge of pride watching him, knowing she'd helped create this moment. The evening flowed perfectly. The food was exceptional, the wine carefully selected. The string quartet Tessa had hired provided the perfect ambience during dinner, and the jazz band that took over afterward had guests on their feet. Tessa was checking in with the catering captain when she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find Xavier, looking devastatingly handsome in his tuxedo. "Everything's perfect," he said. "Better than perfect." "It's going well," Tessa agreed, trying to maintain her professional composure even though her heart was racing. "No major issues so far." "Dance with me," Xavier said, extending his hand. "I'm working," Tessa protested. "I need to be available if anything comes up." "One dance," Xavier insisted. "Everyone here thinks you're a guest anyway. No one will question it." Tessa knew she should say no. But there were only a few hours left in her contract, and she'd been wanting him, for so long. She took his hand. Xavier led her onto the dance floor, pulling her close as the band played a slow, sultry number. His hand was warm on her back, his body solid against hers. "This is the most difficult thing I've ever done," Xavier murmured near her ear. "Waiting for you." "I'm right here," Tessa said. "Not the way I want you," Xavier replied. "Not yet." They swayed together, the rest of the room fading away. Tessa was aware of other guests watching them, probably wondering who she was, but she didn't care. This moment felt like it existed outside of time, separate from the professional relationship they'd maintained for 3 months. "After tonight," Xavier said, "I'm taking you on that date. Somewhere nice. Somewhere I can look at you without having to think about contracts or professional boundaries." "I'd like that," Tessa said, looking up at him. "And then," Xavier continued, his voice low and intimate, "I'm going to kiss you the way I've been wanting to kiss you since the day you called me out in that conference room." Heat flooded through Tessa's body. "Just kiss me," she asked daringly. Xavier's eyes darkened. "Whatever you want, Tessa." "Everything you want." The song ended and they stepped apart reluctantly. Tessa's head was spinning, her body humming with anticipation. A few more hours, she told herself. Just a few more hours. The rest of the gala passed in a happy blur. Guests complimented the venue, the food, the entertainment. Richard found Tessa near midnight to tell her that Xavier had already received verbal commitments for 3 major deals, all thanks to the connections made tonight. "You've made him very happy," Richard said. "And I'm not just talking about the business deals." By 1 in the morning, the last guests were leaving. The band was packing up, the catering staff was clearing tables. Tessa supervised the beginning of the breakdown, making sure everything was handled carefully. She found Xavier in the main hall, loosening his bow tie as he watched the last of his guests depart. "We did it," she said, walking up beside him. "You did it," Xavier corrected. "This was all you, Tessa. Your vision, your execution." "Our collaboration," Tessa said. "I couldn't have done it without your input, even when your input was irritating." Xavier laughed. "Especially when it was irritating." He checked his watch. "It's after 1. Your contract officially ends at midnight, which means we're no longer in a professional relationship," Tessa finished. "Which means I can do this," Xavier said, and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was everything Tessa had imagined and more. Xavier's lips were firm and demanding, his hands tangling in her hair, dislodging the careful pins. She melted against him, 3 months of tension and wanting finally finding release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for so long," he said. "So have I," Tessa admitted. "Every meeting was torture." "Every meeting was the best part of my day," Xavier said. "Even when we were arguing, especially when we were arguing," Tessa laughed, feeling giddy and light. "So what now?" "Now," Xavier said, "I take you to breakfast. The sun will be up in a few hours and I know a place that makes incredible pancakes. And then I take you home and I do this the right way. Proper dates, proper courtship. You deserve that, Tessa." "What if I don't want proper?" Tessa asked, emboldened by the desire she could see in his eyes. "What if I want you?" Xavier groaned. "You're making this very difficult." "Good," Tessa said. "You made my life difficult for 3 months. Turnabout is fair play." "Fine," Xavier said, kissing her again, slower this time, deeper. "But I'm still taking you to breakfast, and on a proper date, because I'm not going to mess this up, Tessa. You're too important." They left the estate hand in hand, driving separately but meeting at an all-night diner that Xavier knew. Over pancakes and coffee, they talked about everything except work. Tessa learned that Xavier loved hiking and had climbed 3 of the tallest peaks in the country, that he played piano but never in front of anyone, that he had a younger sister who lived overseas and called him every Sunday. Xavier learned that Tessa had wanted to be an artist before discovering event planning, that she'd been engaged once, years ago, to someone who'd wanted her to give up her career, that she had a complicated relationship with her parents who'd never understood her ambition. "I'm glad you didn't give up your career," Xavier said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "The world would have lost an incredible event planner, and I never would have met you." "I'm glad I walked into that conference room 3 months ago," Tessa said. "Even though you were impossibly rude." "I was protecting myself," Xavier admitted. "I took one look at you and knew you were dangerous, knew you could get under my skin if I let you, so I tried to push you away." "Didn't work," Tessa pointed out. "Best failure of my life," Xavier said. The sun was rising when Xavier walked Tessa to her car. They stood in the parking lot, neither wanting to say goodbye. "Dinner tonight?" Xavier asked. "I know a place. Actually nice this time, not a diner at 6 in the morning." "I'd love that," Tessa said. Xavier kissed her one more time, soft and sweet. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll pick you up at 7. Tessa floated through the rest of the day. She checked in with the estate to make sure the breakdown had gone smoothly, sent thank-you emails to all the vendors, and tried unsuccessfully to nap. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Xavier's face, felt his kiss. He picked her up at 7 exactly, dressed in dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes look even darker. He took her to an elegant French restaurant with candlelight and excellent wine, and they talked for hours about their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. "I want to expand the company internationally," Xavier told her. "Open offices in 3 more countries over the next 5 years. But I also want a life outside of work. I've been so focused on building the business that I've neglected everything else." "Like relationships?" Tessa asked. "I haven't had a serious relationship in 5 years," Xavier admitted. "Work has been my priority. But meeting you made me realize what I've been missing. I want this, Tessa. I want us. If you're willing to take a chance on a workaholic CEO who's probably going to be difficult sometimes." "I've spent 3 months watching you be difficult," Tessa said with a smile. "I think I can handle it." "As long as you can handle an event planner who's just as stubborn as you are." "I'm counting on it," Xavier said, reaching across the table to take her hand. Their relationship fell into a natural rhythm over the following weeks. Xavier was careful about public appearances at first, not wanting anyone to think Tessa had gotten the job through anything other than merit. But privately they were inseparable. Dinners, long walks, movies, nights spent talking until dawn. Tessa met Xavier's sister, Julia, who flew in from London for Thanksgiving. Julia was warm and funny, and she pulled Tessa aside after dinner to say, "I've never seen my brother this happy. Thank you for that." Xavier met Tessa's parents at a slightly awkward brunch where her mother spent the entire time asking pointed questions about Xavier's intentions. But by the end, even her traditionally conservative father was won over by Xavier's sincerity and obvious devotion to Tessa. They had their first real fight 3 months into their relationship, over something stupid. Tessa had been hired to plan an event for one of Westmont Industries' competitors, and Xavier had initial reservations about the potential conflict of interest. "I'm not asking you to cancel," Xavier said, his voice tight with frustration. "I'm asking you to consider how it looks." "It looks like I'm a professional event planner doing my job," Tessa shot back. "You don't owe me, Xavier. We're not business partners. This is my career." They argued for an hour before Xavier finally threw up his hands. "You're right," he said. "I'm being controlling and irrational. Take the job. I trust you." "Just like that?" Tessa asked, surprised. "Just like that," Xavier confirmed. "You called me out on my behavior and you were right." "That's what I need from you, Tessa. Someone who won't let me get away with being impossible." They made up thoroughly after that, and the fight actually strengthened their relationship. They learned they could disagree and argue without it threatening what they had. 6 months after the gala, Xavier asked Tessa to move in with him. His penthouse apartment was enormous, with views of the city and plenty of space for both of them. "I know it's fast," Xavier said, "but I wake up every morning wishing you were there. I come home every night wishing you were waiting. Move in with me, Tessa." Tessa looked around her small apartment, the place she'd lived for 4 years. Then she looked at Xavier, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I'll move in with you." Living together was an adjustment. Xavier was neat to the point of obsession, while Tessa tended to leave projects scattered around. But they learned to compromise, to communicate, to share space and life and everything in between. Tessa continued to build her event planning business, her reputation growing after the success of the Westmont Gala. She hired 2 assistants and started turning down jobs she didn't have time for. Xavier supported her completely, never asking her to prioritize his schedule over her work. They traveled together when they could, stealing long weekends to explore new cities. Xavier took Tessa hiking in Colorado, and she surprised him with how much she loved the challenge of the trail. Tessa dragged Xavier to art museums and galleries, and he discovered an appreciation for modern sculpture he hadn't expected. A year after they met, Xavier took Tessa back to the Italian restaurant where they'd had their first non-business dinner. They sat at the same table, ordered the same food. "I have something for you," Xavier said after they'd finished eating. He pulled out a small velvet box and Tessa's breath caught. "I've been thinking about this for months," Xavier said. "Trying to find the right moment, the right words. But the truth is, every moment with you is right. You challenge me, support me, love me, and call me out when I'm being impossible. You make me want to be better. You make me better." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring, the stone catching the candlelight. "Tessa Anderson," Xavier said, "will you marry me?" Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Of course it did. Xavier never did anything without paying attention to every detail. They got married 6 months later in a small, intimate ceremony at the Montgomery estate. The the place where their professional relationship had ended and their personal one had truly begun. Lily was Tessa's maid of honor, and Richard stood up as Xavier's best man. Julia flew in from London, and even Tessa's parents managed to look happy throughout the ceremony. Xavier had wanted to hire someone else to plan the wedding, not wanting Tessa to work on her own event. But Tessa had insisted on doing it herself, with help from her assistants. "This is our day," she told Xavier. "I want every detail to be exactly what we want." The ceremony was at sunset, with golden light streaming through the ballroom windows. Tessa wore a simple, elegant dress with her hair down, the way Xavier loved it. Xavier looked stunned when she walked down the aisle, his eyes never leaving her face. They wrote their own vows. Xavier promised to trust Tessa's instincts, to listen more than he directed, and to never stop challenging her to be her best self. Tessa promised to call Xavier out when he was being impossible, to support his ambitions, and to always meet him halfway. "I promise to argue with you," Tessa added, making the small group of guests laugh. "Because our best moments come when we're pushing each other." "I promise to be worth arguing with," Xavier replied, his voice thick with emotion. The reception was small but perfect, with food from their favorite restaurants and music from the jazz band that had played at the gala. They danced together as husband and wife, and Tessa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. "I love you," Xavier murmured against her hair, "even when you drive me crazy." "Especially when I drive you crazy," Tessa corrected, and Xavier laughed. They honeymooned in Italy, spending 2 weeks exploring the countryside, eating incredible food and sleeping late. Xavier turned off his phone for the entire trip, something he'd never done before, giving Tessa his complete attention. "I never knew life could be like this," he admitted one evening as they sat on the terrace of their villa, watching the sun set over the rolling hills. "I thought work was everything. That success was all that mattered. But this, being here with you, is the only thing that really matters." "Work still matters," Tessa said. "Your company, my business, those are important, but they're not everything." "No," Xavier agreed, pulling her close. "You're everything." They returned home to discover that Richard had handled everything at Westmont Industries without a single crisis, proving that Xavier could step away without the world ending. And Tessa's assistants had managed her business beautifully, taking on 2 new clients in her absence. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Xavier made an effort to leave work at reasonable hours, to be present at home. Tessa took on fewer projects, choosing quality over quantity. They made time for each other, for date nights and lazy Sunday mornings and everything in between. 2 years after their wedding, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. She'd been feeling tired and queasy for weeks before finally taking a test. When the positive result appeared, she stared at it in shock for a full minute before the reality sank in. She called Xavier at work, something she rarely did. "Can you come home?" she asked. "I have something to show you." Xavier was there within 20 minutes, looking concerned. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Are you okay?" Tessa handed him the pregnancy test without a word. Xavier looked at it, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to pure joy. "We're having a baby?" he asked, his voice wondering. "We're having a baby," Tessa confirmed, tears streaming down her face. Xavier picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "We're having a baby," he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Tessa refused to slow down as much as Xavier wanted her to. She continued working until her 8th month, planning events and managing her business from increasingly creative positions as her belly grew. "You're stubborn," Xavier complained one evening, finding her on her feet at an event when he'd thought she'd be taking it easy. "You married me knowing that," Tessa replied. Don't act surprised now. Their daughter was born on a snowy January morning, arriving 3 days early and in a hurry. Tessa labored for only 6 hours before Emma Catherine Westmont made her entrance into the world, crying lustily and looking exactly like her father. Xavier held his daughter with shaking hands, his eyes wet with tears. "She's perfect," he whispered. "Tessa, she's absolutely perfect." "She is," Tessa agreed, exhausted but glowing. Parenthood changed everything and nothing. They were tired, overwhelmed, learning as they went. But they were a team, supporting each other through sleepless nights and endless diaper changes and the absolute wonder of watching their daughter grow. Xavier scaled back his hours at work even more, determined not to miss moments with Emma. He hired a second in command, promoting Richard to COO and distributing responsibilities he'd once insisted only he could handle. Tessa took 6 months off, the longest she'd been away from work since starting her business. But her assistants kept things running, and she discovered she didn't miss it as much as she'd thought she would. Being home with Emma, watching Xavier become a father, felt like the most important work she'd ever done. When Emma was 18 months old, Tessa and Xavier stood in the nursery late one night, watching their daughter sleep. Emma was sprawled on her back, her dark hair messy, her thumb in her mouth. "You remember that first meeting?" Tessa asked quietly. "When you told me I was 3 minutes late," Xavier groaned. "I was such an ass." "You were," Tessa agreed, "but I wouldn't change a thing." Because that meeting, that project, led to all of this. She gestured around the nursery, but she meant more than just the room. She meant their life, their love, their family. "Best decision I ever made," Xavier said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Hiring you, fighting with you, falling in love with you. Best decision I ever made was not walking out when you were being impossible," Tessa replied. "Well, I did walk out once, but I came back." "You always come back," Xavier said. "Even when I don't deserve it." "You always deserve it," Tessa corrected. "You're a good man, Xavier. A good husband, a good father, even if you are still impossible sometimes." "Only sometimes?" Xavier asked with a grin. "Most of the time," Tessa amended, "but I wouldn't have you any other way." They stood together in the quiet room, watching their daughter sleep, and Tessa thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that confrontational first meeting to standing in their child's nursery, it had been a wild, unexpected, perfect ride. "I love you," Xavier said quietly. "I love you too," Tessa replied, "even when we're fighting." "Especially when we're fighting," Xavier said, echoing her words from their wedding, because that was the truth of their relationship. They challenged each other, pushed each other, refused to let each other settle for less than their best. They argued and made up and argued again. But through it all there was love. Deep, abiding, unshakable love. Emma stirred in her crib, making a small sound before settling back to sleep. Xavier squeezed Tessa's hand, and they quietly left the room, leaving the door cracked so they could hear if she woke, in their bedroom. Xavier pulled Tessa close, kissing her with the easy familiarity of long practice mixed with the spark that had never faded between them. "Still can't stay apart," he murmured against her lips. "Never could," Tessa agreed. "Never will." And that was the one thing, from the very beginning, they'd always agreed on. No matter how many details they clashed over, no matter how many arguments they had, they couldn't stay apart. Didn't want to. Because together, fighting and loving and building a life was exactly where they both belonged. Years later, when Emma was 5 and her little brother Thomas was 3, the family attended the annual Westmont Industries Gala. It was being held at the Montgomery estate again, and Tessa had consulted on the planning even though she'd officially retired from event planning to focus on family, and a new venture teaching event planning courses. Emma held Xavier's hand as they walked into the ballroom, her eyes wide. "Daddy, it's so pretty," she said. "Your mother planned the very first event here," Xavier told her. "That's where we fell in love." "I thought you fell in love when Mommy yelled at you," Emma said, and Tessa laughed. "That too," Xavier admitted. "Your mother is very good at yelling at me when I deserve it." "Which is often," Tessa added, smiling at her husband. They danced together that night, just like they had at that first gala, with their children eventually joining them on the dance floor. Thomas stood on Xavier's shoes while Emma twirled in her fancy dress, and Tessa felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they'd built. "Happy?" Xavier asked, pulling her close while the kids danced around them. "Incredibly," Tessa replied. "You?" "More than I ever thought possible," Xavier said. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I was impossible." "Thank you for being worth the effort," Tessa replied. They kissed, ignoring the amused looks from their children and the other guests, because some things never changed. They still challenged each other, still argued over details, still drove each other crazy sometimes. But they also still loved fiercely, supported unconditionally, and refused to stay apart. It had started with a confrontation in a conference room, with clashing opinions and stubborn wills. It had grown through arguments and compromises, through learning to trust and let go. And it had become this: a family, a partnership, a love that had weathered every challenge and come out stronger. As the music played and their children laughed and the night unfolded around them, Tessa looked at Xavier and saw her whole world. The impossible CEO who'd driven her crazy, the man who challenged her to be better, the husband who loved her completely, the father who adored their children. "I'd do it all again," she told him. "Every argument, every difficult moment, all of it." "So would I," Xavier said, 1,000 times over. And as they swayed together in the ballroom where their love story had truly begun, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Tessa knew that despite all the details they'd clashed over through the years, they'd always agreed on the one thing that mattered most. They belonged together, and nothing would ever change that. The gala continued late into the night, but eventually, Xavier and Tessa gathered their sleepy children and headed home. Emma fell asleep in the car, and Xavier carried her inside while Tessa managed Thomas. They tucked both kids into bed, kissing them goodnight. In their own bedroom, as they got ready for bed, Xavier pulled Tessa into his arms one more time. "Best life ever," he said simply. "Best life ever," Tessa agreed, and it was, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was theirs. Built on arguments and compromises, on challenges and love, on the understanding that sometimes the person who drives you craziest is also the person you can't imagine living without. They climbed into bed, Xavier pulling Tessa against his side the way he always did. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new arguments, new moments of joy and frustration. But they'd face it together, the way they always had. Because in the end, that was what mattered, not the details they'd clashed over or the arguments they'd had, but the love they shared, the family they'd built, and the absolute certainty that they'd never be able to stay apart. It was everything Tessa had never known she wanted, and everything Xavier had been too focused on work to realize he needed. And it had all started with a late arrival, a confrontational meeting, and two stubborn people who couldn't help but fall in love. Their story was far from over. There would be more arguments, more challenges, more moments of joy and frustration, and everything in between. Emma would grow up and eventually plan her own events, having inherited both her mother's creativity and her father's attention to detail. Thomas would follow Xavier into the business world, bringing fresh ideas and a more balanced approach to work and life. But through it all, Xavier and Tessa would remain the constants in each other's lives. Partners, lovers, best friends, still arguing over details, still challenging each other, still absolutely unable to stay apart, and they wouldn't have it any other way.